Welcome to Midlife Matters, where we celebrate women's wisdom and wit. I'm Georgian Lussier, your host, and I am delighted to introduce today's guest, Susan Omilian. Susan is an attorney and an advocate for women impacted by violence. She's an award-winning originator and facilitator of workshops called My Avenging Angel, and she's here to share her story with us. So welcome, Susan.
Thank you.
You were a secondary victim of violence.
Yes.
When your niece Maggie was killed.
Yes.
This was, as you call it, a defining moment in your life, and it seems to have set you on a mission to both heal yourself and then help others also in that process. So if you could just reflect on that tragic event and celebrate Maggie in this video clip we're showing right now. We'll talk about some of the background to that.
Okay.
I got the phone call in the middle of the night from my sister. You know, when the phone rings in the middle of the night, it's not good. She finally said, you know, Maggie's been killed. It was just going through my head, how could this happen? How could this happen? Maggie's my niece, and she was a kid that was just phenomenal and very gregarious, kind of a problem solver for her friends. Her girlfriends always say, you know, I could call Maggie up at 2 o'clock in the morning and she'd help me solve a problem, or we'd talk it through, kind of thing. She was a sophomore in college. She was 19 years old. She had a boyfriend. She met him in, I think, February or March of her freshman year. They broke up sometime in May. He was trying to keep contact with her, and she was saying, no, I don't want to be with you. And she didn't know he had a gun. And they had some kind of argument in the room. And then shots were fired. He killed her and he killed himself. I'm like, well, how am I going to get revenge? I mean, that's how we're supposed to do this. We get revenge, we throw them in jail, they won't hurt anybody anymore. Like many people today, I Googled the word revenge. I got this quote, living well is the best revenge. And that just really felt like, not only for me personally, because this man tried to he destroyed my niece, he tried to destroy my family. It's like, no way he's going to do that. At Maggie's moment of her death, she didn't survive. She didn't have a chance to move on. And that's what, first of all, I wanted to do, because I was now a secondary victim of a crime, to not only survive, but to move on and to thrive, and that I wanted to help other women to do that also. So that Maggie didn't have that chance. I wanted to give that chance to somebody else. And that's what my work's really been about.
So what a tribute to Maggie that 15 years later, your free workshops have helped so many women move on from these kind of events in their lives. And please share how the workshop came about, how it evolved, who were your key sponsors. What's the story of the workshops?
Well, when Maggie was killed, the idea of revenge is what I was really kind of, and you know, usually in these kind of cases, somebody is murdered or is harmed, and then the criminal justice system sort of kicks in, and there's a sense of revenge. And because he killed himself, which was kind of a gift, actually, although it sounds kind of strange to say that, to us it was, because we didn't have to go through that process. So really, for me, trying to think about what it was like, and I sort of envisioned that at the moment of Maggie's death, when she got it, because he never touched her physically, he never threatened her physically, she didn't understand that the other signs of abuse, emotional and psychological abuse. He was very jealous of her and isolated her from family and friends, that those were all signs of emotional abuse that did put her into danger and could take her to the place where she could be harmed. She didn't get all that, so the moment of her death is really when she figured it out, and she didn't have a chance to move on. So that was really important to me, and I really didn't know what that meant. I didn't really know what I was supposed to do. I thought at first I was supposed to go back and do legal work. I had worked with women who had been going through divorce as an attorney, taking them to court for the divorce and also getting restraining orders. I had done sexual assault victim counseling, but it didn't seem right. I myself had, because I was a secondary victim of a crime, you know, had been traumatized myself. So I couldn't do that. Every victim I talked to was Maggie, and that was just too hard for me. A lot of the things that I do in the workshop today were things that helped me as I was on my own journey, and I sort of put them together in kind of this magical way. I don't know that I guess it was also a gift. Somehow I knew that this worked and this worked and this worked, so why don't I put it together and see if it works for somebody else? And so the first workshop I did, it went okay, but I sort of regrouped, and then I got to Hartford Hospital, mostly because the woman who was my gynecologist actually had gone to the same school that Maggie had gone to. The school Maggie was killed at was in Kalamazoo, Michigan, Kalamazoo College, and it was one of the best pre-med schools in the country. So my gynecologist had gone there. I didn't even know that until a year after Maggie was killed. And so she said to me, well, what are you going to do about this? And I'm like, I have this idea about a workshop. Go see somebody at Hartford Hospital. She gave me the name of Patricia McIntosh, who at the time was the head of the domestic violence prevention program there. And Patricia was just one of those visionary people who said, yeah, this is a good idea. So she envisioned it as I envisioned it, kind of like that third step to help women move on. And at that time, and still, Hartford Hospital had made a real commitment to train their doctors and nurses about domestic violence, helping people identify as victims, which my niece had never done. And then they felt this piece would fit in as one of the next pieces along the way. So they let me do it there, and they continue to give me free rental space and help me with registration. So the workshop is really designed to, in a two-day session, to get women to come back to this positive energy. Some of them have felt that before in their life, because I meet a lot of women who come to me after an adult relationship that was abusive. But I also have women who've come through child abuse into adulthood, into other kinds of, I even have women who've come through sexual harassment on the job. So they might have a whole continuum of experiences, and if they've ever felt this energy, this positive energy. So I try to get them to think about the part of themselves that's been untouched by what happened to them. And I believe there is a part of us that's been untouched, and to bring that energy back up. So that's really how I see the workshops. And oddly enough, because I felt like I didn't know what I was doing to start, that women did start to respond and felt like there was something, not only that I could offer to them, but something that was missing for them in the services that were out there at the time.
Is there also another key sponsor, Connecticut Alive?
Yes, so one of the things that I was really clear about from the very beginning, I didn't want women to pay for the workshops. Most of the women I work with, because of the abuse and the traumas they've gone through, economically they're not in great places. They may still be, when I meet them, going through legal battles, paying attorneys, or because of the trauma and the violence they've gone through, abuse in their life, they haven't had the opportunities that you and I have had to get educated, to get a good job, and there are some women like that, but the vast majority aren't. So for about 8 years, I did the workshops. I didn't get paid for them. And then I woke up in the morning and said, I really have to think about this. I love to give back, but I really felt that I couldn't continue and expand if I didn't do something else. So I had started this nonprofit myself, actually, a few years before that. As a survivor of homicide, I was involved with a nonprofit that was doing services to survivors of homicide. About 5 of us left that organization and started CT Alive. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I began to use this organization to support my work. So not only do I now get paid for the workshops, but materials are covered, and I also do a weekend retreat, and for which I don't charge the women for my time, but I do have rental costs for the retreat center. Some women can't pay that, so I have a scholarship fund. So I try to really reduce all the obstacles I can think of, financially and emotionally and socially, to get them into a process, because once they go through the workshop and go to both sessions of the workshop, they're invited to come into the community and meet monthly with other women who've also come through the workshop, and then come to the retreat. And now I'm doing some job search, a job search program for them, because at the end of the workshop they come with a goal. They reach a goal. They set a goal for themselves, and in many cases that goal is to get a better job or get a job, or in some way economically work through some stuff. So, so it's really kind of building a community of women, reducing the obstacles they have to moving on, and supporting them in what they feel they need to do to reclaim their lives.
And about how many women would you estimate make up this community?
I probably have about 100 people, 100 women that are fairly active. I've had maybe 200, 300, maybe even more women come to the workshop, but for a variety of reasons, you know, they move, and I do have women who don't show up they come to the workshop, don't show up for a while to the follow-ups, and then about a year or two later, like, oh, hi, remember me? You know, things have been happening, but I really want to come back. And so, because they find there's really no other place. The way I describe it is that it's a community of women who've experienced what they've experienced.
It was the first time that I was among other women who were going through this, and that alone helped validate that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't the only one going through this.
Although we never compare stories, I never ask them to tell their stories, but they're moving on. So they might find women who, it's hard to find women, hard to share the story, so there's shame in sharing the story, so it's hard to even find women that you can tell your story to. And then sometimes you can tell your story to some women, but they sort of just keep you in that victim place. And so what I offer is a community that has a shared experience, but we're moving on. And then they can see that some of the women in the group have been in the group longer, and their success has been better than theirs, or more than theirs. And they're like, oh, I want to be like that, you know. So it's a way to sort of benchmark where you are and where you want to be.
So they do serve as an inspiration
Yes.
to each other.
Yes.
And it sounds somewhat like a support group to me.
Yeah, I try to stay away from the word support because it assumes that they're there for the victimization.
For the need.
Right.
Okay.
I want it to be more like a place to come, feel positive, think positive, do positive, and walk away positive. And if you need that, like that shot. I mean, I have a woman once said to me, you know, I can't come to the retreat this year because I don't feel like a thriver. I'm like, well, that's why you come to the retreat. You know, you come, I mean, I don't feel like a thriver every day either. You come to the retreat and we get our energy back, and then you can go back out into the world and do what you need to do. And that's the concept that they sort of don't, there's no place else to find that. And they actually say to me, you know, what I've learned, not only that this is a great community for me, but I'm going to surround myself with positive people doing positive things in my everyday life as much as I can. Or with their kids, you know, we're going to do positive things and think positive things and have positive goals.
It does sound like a significant mind shift that people need to make to move from victim to survivor to thriver.
The way the battered women's movement, the domestic violence movement, has really framed the issue. Unlike my niece, she never identified as a victim. So there's a strong pull in the services over the last 30 so years. Because when I first came into the movement, there were very few services for women. They had just, when I came out of college and into law school, there was very few shelters that have actually been set up for domestic violence, and some sexual assault crisis centers. So there had been identification with victimization and some idea of, okay, if you're out, then you're a survivor. But that was sort of the drop-off point. And I've met women today who have come, and actually one member on our board who said, you know, I left an abusive relationship 20, 25 years ago. I figured out how to be a thriver, but I had to do it all by myself. So that's why she came on our board. I really want to make it easier for other women. And it's even just to put the words out there. One of the exercises I do in the workshop is I ask them to tell me their favorite fairy tale. And in that process of talking about why they love this fairy tale and what do they learn from it, I sort of lay out that every fairy tale is a story of a struggle, a transformation, and a happy ending. And that's the victim, survivor to thriver.
Wonderful.
And when they look at that, they're like, oh my God, like nobody told me I was on a journey. You know? And so however they experience it, they don't have words for it. And if they had a word for it, they would never associate it initially with the happy ending, because the happy ending, the way, unfortunately, we were taught the happy ending was like way out there somewhere, and we're never going to get to it. And so I tried to get them to see the happy ending can be in their present life, and even if it's maybe not the goal that they've reached and the place they've taken themselves to, but it's a state of mind, you know, a more positive place. And when we do the list of victim to survivor to thriver, underneath that thriver, that happy ending is like love and peace and freedom. For some women, to not be in an abusive relationship where people aren't yelling and screaming at each other anymore, hey, that's peace and freedom. And that's great. You know, they're going for that in the immediate moment, and then they keep adding on to it, family and connection and meaningful work and giving back and helping and healing others and all the things that fall in that category that they want to achieve at some point.
Received so many accolades for your advocacy work in this area. The list I have starts in 2004, Woman of Character, Woman of Distinction.
My brothers make fun of me.
Women helping women.
Oh yeah, you're a real character.
All right.
Yeah.
What is the most meaningful thing for you in terms of this work that you've been able to do in honor of Maggie?
Well, you know, it's great to get awards and recognition, and that's lovely. I don't do the work for that. I think the most meaningful thing, well, there's two parts to it. The most meaningful thing to me is I get to see women transform. And sometimes I literally get to see them do it in front of my eyes. I see women come into the workshop and looking downtrodden and their faces just completely forlorn. They don't even know, they're almost like in shell shock. They don't even know why they're there. You know, why am I here? I get to see them physically sometimes transform in an hour or two, and their faces just light up. I mean, that's just like the best thing since sliced bread. And the other thing is, and I always say this when I get an award, I'm not the most courageous person here. The women I work with are extremely courageous, and to watch them transform and watch them do the things that, I mean, I don't know what I expected. When I started doing this work, I expected people to be successful, but they've gone way beyond my expectations. In the video, Vanessa, she's a singer, but when she came into the workshop, she wasn't singing. And she was in her 20s, and I had never heard her sing, so that's interesting. Why aren't you singing? And she described that the abuse that she had suffered was by a man who was her music partner. He used to play the guitar for her, and they would go out and sing together in coffee houses. And when he got arrested for domestic violence and there were restraining orders, she associated the abuse with the music, and she stopped singing. And one thing my niece used to say, Maggie used to say, is when we used to talk about some things that are happening in the world, it's like, that is so unfair, Aunt Susan. We have to do something about that. And I thought, this is so unfair. This woman, she's not going to not sing anymore. I mean, that doesn't seem right. So slowly, through a series of adventures, because of the group, Vanessa started singing again. And not only is she singing, but she's singing songs about her journey to thriving. Every time she sings, I have this like thing in my heart. You know, it's like, what if she never did it? Wouldn't that be a great tragedy? So that's the reward. And if she can do that, she can do anything.
Yes.
You know, that's really what I tell these women. If you can leave an abusive relationship and confront physical danger in doing so, you can do anything. That's your benchmark. You know, the same way that Maggie's death is my benchmark. It was one of the hardest things I ever had to deal with in my life. And when other things come along, like being on TV shows, you know, oh, I can do that. You know, is it as hard as doing that? Oh, no, that's easy. You know, this is easy. I can do this.
And among your many credentials, you're certified as a facilitator of a domestic violence program. If you could talk a little bit about some of the related services you've been involved in delivering.
After Maggie was killed, I came back to Connecticut, and I did get certified as a domestic violence counselor, which is part of a law that I actually helped write many years ago, which is part of the confidential communications law. That's helped me in my work with women. I had worked in this area for many years, so it was kind of like a refresher course for me. I had worked with women who had been abused before. When I was working at Legal Aid, noticed that I was just taking that one woman away from that one man. And he was going to say the same. And he was going to go on and do 10 more women. So it was sort of like, we haven't solved the problem. We just keep telling the women, don't go there, don't go there. So when Maggie was killed, I really felt like there were two people who were, who could have been saved that night, her and this young man. And so I decided I wanted to work with men who were arrested for domestic violence. I started exploring where the programs were and what they were about. I felt I needed to do that to see if there was a way that I could affect an answer that made more sense than just constantly working with the women. And oddly enough, which I didn't think was going to happen, but it's true, working with the men has impacted the way I work with the women, and vice versa. And it's been very rewarding in some sense, although it's been very sad too, because you can see how the cycle of violence starts. When I ask the men, with rare exception, what their childhood was like, they will always tell me it was full of violence. Domestic violence, child abuse, street violence. And so it doesn't justify their behavior, but it makes you understand that they don't have a lot of tools in their toolbox. The programs that I'm currently working with here in Hartford, in fact, is a combination of anger management, teaching them anger management tools and communication tools, and also doing some basic domestic violence work, the cycle of violence, and talking about how we're socialized, particularly men are socialized to be aggressive, women are socialized to be more passive, and then we switch the roles sometimes and it becomes really difficult in relationships. So I think that's a really key thing to do. I've seen some men change. I think women, a lot of women tell me, I was with this guy, I married him, I thought he was going to change one day. I thought he was going to wake up one day and he would realize that what he was doing wasn't serving him. That's a lovely thought, but they do need treatment plans. And unfortunately in Connecticut, there are very few voluntary programs. So you really, the men I work with are the ones who've been mandated into the program. And yet we can, do some work. It's a 26-week program. It has some potential to give them a new perspective and also some new tools.
And you're an author yourself, and you teach a writing group.
That's true.
And how does that fit into your whole mosaic?
Well, I've always been a writer. Everything I've ever done has come back to writing. So I decided one day I should really be a writer. In doing the workshop, I realized, because I am a writer, that there was some value in the exercises that I had. And particularly, I asked some of the women, I do a lot of writing exercises, like the fairy tale exercise. I have them write about a fairy tale that they loved. So I started collecting some of their samples and decided I would put together a workbook that had the exercises so that you could go through them yourself. And then I interviewed about 15 different women as survivor success stories, answering that question, how did you get from survivor to thriver? How did that work for you? So I put it together, and Vanessa, we co-produced a CD together, a music CD, and also some meditations. And so that's really been what I've been able to do. I also have a novel that I've been working on that's in the same theme of domestic violence and somewhat loosely based on my niece's murder. And I'm trying to get out there. And then I teach writing classes. A lot of women come to me and they want to write their story. So I have worked with some of them. Other people in my writing classes come to me and say, I want to write this story about abuse and what happened to me. And they're like, is that okay? And it's like, oh yeah, that's fine. You won't get freaked out. Oh no, it's fine. But I try to get them to see that to write that story, they have to do victim to survivor to thriver. Because in reading a book like that, people want to know, hey, how did you get there? And are you okay? Kind of thing. So it's sort of the same journey, and then trying to get them to describe it in such a way. If energy work is part of their journey, then how does that work? And some of them are actually putting together books that are like memoir / self-help. So this is the things that help me, and maybe they'll help you.
So you'll have a whole little library at some point, right?
Yeah, you could. I self-publish my workbook, and one of the things I teach people is how to self-publish their books.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's kind of fun.
It is fun. Now, I'd like to invite you to reflect on your life, and you've certainly had many, many rich experiences that this conversation can't even touch on, in addition to all the work that you've done. But if you could write a letter to your 25-year-old self, what might you say, dear Susan?
Well, this is an interesting question because when I was 25, it was like 1972 or 73, something like that. I was trying to figure this out. It was the height of the women's movement. So I had all kinds of role models. I met Gloria Steinem. Bella Abzug was one of my role models. Betty Friedan, I had read her book, which of course was banned in most places that I was. So my 25-year-old self was probably more confident and more visionary than I am. Not that I'm not confident and visionary, but it's really interesting to me that at 25, I really knew exactly what I was doing and what I wanted to do, and less so than I do today. In some ways, it's like that person is still in me, but it's not that there's been hard knocks, but there's been a sense of it didn't quite go the way that I thought it was going to go, and not because I had made decisions even before I was 25 about not having children, and I was going to have a career, and I was going to be a writer. In fact, at 25, I was actually working for a newspaper in this job that I loved, and I had made a decision that I would soon go to law school. So it was all sort of there, and it wasn't like I had. Some people at 25 are kind of like wandering about, don't know what they're doing. I was very clear.
You had a very clear picture.
Yeah, and I was very lucky, because it was the time that women could do that. I mean, I don't know that we all thought it was going to be peaches and cream as we went along, but there was like this energy, this energy. And my mother's generation was, you have that baby and you get married and you have this and you don't go, you don't. When I got married, I didn't change my name, and that was like, the whole world almost fell apart.
Really?
In my oh yeah, it was just very controversial, not to me personally, and my husband's like, oh, whatever. But yeah, and because I was interested in the law and I'd been doing a lot of reading, feminist reading, I knew that I could do that there's no law saying you have to change your name. It's all custom. So I found myself educating everybody from my parents to my in-laws to the store clerk who was yelling at me because my husband's name wasn't on the credit card, and what was I thinking I was doing?
What's going on here?
And if you don't change your name, I mean, what are you going to name your kids? And she was just like screaming at me in the middle of Kmart.
Very threatening, right.
So
threatening to the world order.
Oh yeah, and women particularly were just like really crazed.
Now, what about your 40-year-old self?
My 40-year-old self was actually in pretty good shape too. At the time, I was working in state government in a very good job. One of the things I always wanted to do with my law degree was do public policy work. So, and I had been doing work there around mental health, around domestic violence, sexual assault, substance abuse. It was a time that a lot of things had fallen into place for me, although the one piece that didn't fall into place until I was almost 50 when Maggie was killed. There were many things that I had done in my lifetime that I didn't understand why I did it. So I didn't understand why I was interested in working with domestic violence victims or sexual. I just didn't understand it because I'd never had that personal experience in my life. And then when Maggie was killed, like everything had come to that. So in some ways I was at 25 and 40 sort of on the path. I just didn't realize that there was actually going to be a moment where it all made sense. And it wasn't that it didn't make sense. I just thought that's what you do, is you keep moving and moving. But in that moment when Maggie was killed, part of me was devastated, and the other part of me was like, okay, now I know what we're supposed to be doing here. So it really became the work I was supposed to do my whole life. And everything was in preparation for that.
That's just an amazing journey, and I'm so honored that you came on the show to share it with us, Susan, and certainly I'm sure all of our viewers are with me in saying we're very sorry that the event that did cause the defining moment, but what a tribute to Maggie. And so really in closing, I'd like to reinforce that quote that you talk about, living well is the best revenge. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
And this has been Midlife Matters. Please tune in to hear from other fascinating women. Georgian Lussier, your host. Thank you very much.